to figure out other ways to engage our families and bring them along in this process with us so that they're as informed as possible before we release the first draft. As a reminder, this is the information that we've been sharing with you related to the new school sites in the current capital improvement plan. The one highlighted in a little bit of a pinkish reddish color at the top is Woods Creek Elementary. As a reminder, that site is complete. However, it is hosting Balcom Elementary at this time. As Balcom Elementary's renovations complete, it will be ready to be its own standalone elementary school named Woods Creek Elementary. That is scheduled to open for the 24-25 school year, and that would be the one new school assignment area we'll be bringing to you this fall. The larger blue bubble represents the 6 schools that are all scheduled to open in the 25-26 school year. So again, you can see why we wanted to get in ahead of the conversation with our families, knowing the impact that so many schools opening in one school year is going to have on members of our district and our families. You'll see at the bottom, this slide was prepared before the official naming had been complete, so it is now the official Morrisville High School that will open in 27-28. We have yet to start our public engagement activities for that site, as it is still a little ways away, but we'll begin that process in the coming years. As a visual reminder of the sites of the schools, again, using that same color palette, Woods Creek is in the Apex, Holly Springs area. Then you see the schools circled in that sort of blue color. Those are the ones scheduled to open in 25-26. And then the darker gray, sort of black looking circle in the northwest is our Morrisville High School. Just a quick by the numbers snapshot of how many families we were able to make contact with during our round of public engagement in the spring. We were able to see a total of 190 family members or parents. Some were students, some were teachers, many were parents at our sessions throughout the county. And then to tag along and to sort of expand on that, asynchronously we made available thought exchanges so that families could participate online and respond to certain questions. And that really is our most powerful form of feedback, because there's so much support for that platform that allows us to quickly analyze and review the information that comes from that feedback tool. In addition, those feedback tools are available to all of you. If you're looking on that future school site, you'll see that even though they've closed for new comments, anyone can go in and still review what comments were posted. So it's really easy for community members to see what's being said, for you as board members to see what's being said, as well as for our department to analyze those thoughts and categorize them for you. So we had a good broad outreach. You'll notice that there's 2 asterisks by the number at Parkside Middle School. This was our first site, and we had such an overwhelming response to the invitation and knew that we were restricted to a certain number of seats at the facility that we'd registered, and we're candidly really nervous that too many families would show up and we'd not be in compliance with fire code and occupancy standards. So we did restrict the total number of invitations we sent to that session, and then we realized there's a bit of an attrition rate between sign up and show up, so we were able to modify very quickly for all of our future sites, and we didn't have quite that same impact. So in the future, we know better, we've learned a lot, we'll be able to make sure we can accommodate as many families as possible. During each of these public engagement sessions, we had 4 core goals. One was to review Board Policy 4150. If you know me, you know I want to make sure you know your policy. So we take some time to do that in each session. We also wanted to start bridging the gap for families. What we heard a lot last year during our enrollment planning process was, you're only planning 1 year in advance. Why aren't you thinking farther down the line? And we started to realize there's this visual disconnect, because as an assignment team, we're bringing you the annual enrollment plan. Yet over somewhere else in other conversations, we're talking about the 5 and 10 and 20-year projections and outlooks. So we wanted to try to bridge that gap for families and show them where this information is that guides the planning and assignment process. So partnering with our long-range planning team and the demographers that we contract with, we've put all of those resources on that future school site so families can start to make those connections. And then really the main reason we were out in the community was to get the thoughts and feedback from the family members that were participating and the community members that were participating. So we spent a decent amount of time in small group discussion, doing round robin conversations, chart papers, markers, sticky notes, good old fashioned face-to-face conversation. and then we rounded out with an opportunity to use the thought exchange to continue to expand that conversation. Separately, for families who weren't physically able to attend, we did follow up with an invitation to participate in the thought exchange. And then we also did a community message later in the process to invite everyone in the district to participate in the thought exchanges. So we worked hard to try to get that outreach as expansive as possible. And we're still learning lessons on ways to do that even better. As a reminder, Board Policy 4150 sets out 4 specific pillars that staff should evaluate when making assignment recommendations, which include student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency. These 4 pillars are not ranked or ordered in any particular sequence, yet we are as staff asked to consider each of these 4 pillars prior to making a recommendation to the board related to an assignment change or an assignment recommendation for a new school. The new little graphic in the middle just represents a video resource that we have that further explains the policy. We did share that video during our sessions, and it's also posted on the Future School site for any family members that would like that explanation clarified. This is just an example of one of the data sets we shared. You've previously seen this in Facilities Committee, but this is an example of the type of data that we wanted to make sure parents were aware we had available to us. So as a reminder for those who might be seeing it for the first time, this is a graphic that represents the live birth rates in Wake counties and then a 5-year later look, Wake County, and a 5-year later look at what that turns into with respect to kindergarten enrollments in the public school system. There's a noticeable dip in the 2020-2021 school year. I think everyone knows why. But we're starting to see that predictable trend that X number of births generally leads to X number of kindergarten enrollments is starting to settle back into a normal trend. We're still seeing somewhat stable, flat growth over the next couple of years, but we're starting to see some significant projections indicating that we'll continue to grow somewhat rapidly once we get through this sort of slow growth period. This is another slide that we shared with families, again, something that you've seen in Facilities Committee, but this is one that shows the importance of doing these projections on an annual basis. So as a reminder, the black line represents the overall projected enrollment for the county when these numbers were crunched in 2020. When we look at them again in 2021, you see the resulting blue line. And when we look at them yet again in 2022, we see the resulting yellow line. So it's very important for families to know that we are looking at this on an annual basis, yet also looking at what this means for us 10 years down the road. So just to let families know, we do know that growth is still predicted to come for us and that we need to be ready for that growth. And one final example just to share here today that was shared with our families during these sessions is an example of what we already know in the near term. This is the projected crowding that you've seen, again, through Facilities Committee in the past, about what it looks like for elementary, middle, and high school. So the small maps are just because I know you've seen these before, and I didn't want to belabor this particular point. But again, sharing these in context with the other pieces of data seemed to be very eye-opening for families to realize, oh, you're helping us connect where it is you're taking your projection data, what you know about on-the-ground crowding today, and then how that might impact some of your recommendations, particularly in our high-growth areas. So really the main reason that we went out for face-to-face conversations was to pose questions to our family members and our community members and try to solicit that feedback. So the first question that we asked was related to what families consider to be the most important factors that we as the district leadership should be considering when we're thinking about managing our enrollment growth and our school crowding. Each one of the sessions had their own separate chart paper that hung up in my office for weeks on end as I continued to look at them and review them. We've eventually put them together. They're all on the Future School site. You'll see a full listing from each individual school there. However, these are common thoughts that came across or key takeaways that sort of showed up in multiple sessions. So in multiple sessions, we did hear, somewhat to Ms. Mahaffey's opening remarks, that communicating early and often and clearly, as much as we possibly can, is really preferred by families. What can they know and how fast can they know it and how much lead time can they have to process that information and make decisions for their family. You'll see information related to traffic patterns and major highways. We saw that in a couple of perspectives. For our elementary parents, it was if it's a consideration that we could walk to school, be thoughtful of that. In our high school sessions, it was about, hey, we have teen drivers. Can we be thoughtful about what the teen drivers might experience on their commute to school? Lots of comments about cohort continuity, feeder patterns, age groups being able to grow together in their school experience. We did have at least one session that talked about before and after school care considerations, really things that are on top of mind for our families. There is one that is a bit of a bucket, but it really was teased out into multiple comments. It's the one that says be mindful of student needs. We had lots of unique and interesting conversations about transition needs for students that might be assigned to a new school but have particular needs. Maybe it's an IEP. Maybe it's an advanced placement course. Maybe it's an after-school or extracurricular activity that they're familiar with. Maybe it's sports. Maybe they're thinking about college applications and what it looks like if I change high schools between 9th and 10th year. Lots of almost, I don't want to say anxiety, but definitely anxiousness about this part of the unknown, of what transition might look like for these families if their student does need to go to one of our new school sites. So just being mindful of these considerations. Talks about walk zones, and the last one is sort of the idea of not splitting neighborhoods. When at all possible, if neighborhoods could attend the same school and be assigned to the same school, there were several comments about that desire or that request. The next question that we opened up, and this is the one that was run through the thought exchange, was now let's be a little bit more specific about this particular community. What is it that our team needs to know, that the district needs to know, that's specific to your community, that maybe I can't learn by looking at my GIS layers in my mapping systems? Something that I can't learn by simply looking at the crowding numbers or the growth rates in your area, or the residential development permits that have been approved. What is it about your community that we should know as a school district to take into consideration and be mindful of as we're making recommendations? So this is where we did encourage families to be a little bit more specific to just their area and their community that they represent. What we heard through this were 9 common themes. I'll get to what would be a topic that would go into this theme in a couple of slides, but communication, continuity, crowding, plans for growth, proximity, quality education for all, school choice, school operations, and transportation seemed to be the large buckets that the thoughts and ideas and concerns sort of fell into as we went through the analysis process. The piece to the right is just to remind you, you saw this a few slides ago about how many comments we received and how many people participated in the thought exchanges. So here you see an example of what a single school's results might look like. So for this particular school, this is the Woods Creek Elementary sample. You'll notice that it doesn't have all 9 categories. So although those were the 9 categories that came across all 7 exchanges, this particular one didn't have some comments in 1 or 2 of those. However, for Woods Creek Elementary in particular, for this community, comments related to the closeness of the school to their community or closeness to their, whatever they defined as close or proximate, seemed to be an important factor. I'll pause for a moment because I'm making the assumption that everybody in the room remembers how thought exchanges work. So the Thought Exchange tool is an online tool that allows families to participate in any language they select to respond to a core question. The core question is presented, sometimes we can add a little bit of background information if needed, and then they enter sort of into the portal. When you enter into the portal, you're presented with this give me one thought kind of idea. I think of it as a virtual sticky note. And participants are encouraged to try to put one thought per virtual sticky note so that we can separate and disaggregate the thoughts as much as possible. Once they feel like they've run their course and answered the question with all the different ideas that they have to post, or they're just, this is all I want, or I don't want to answer the question, I just want to see what everybody else said. They move on to the next section, and the next section asks them to start rating the thoughts that are already in the exchange. So that way they can say, oh, this comment, this is wonderful, I'm so glad somebody said this, this really aligns with my thinking, I'm going to give it a 4 or 5. Or, oh, I never thought about that, but that's extremely important, and I'm so glad this is in here, and I want to make sure people know this is important, give it a 4 or 5. It could be, that doesn't seem to resonate with my family, that's not something that we're concerned about, and so it might rank a lower score with a 1 or a 2. What this does is then allows us to figure out overall how each of these thoughts, comments, concerns are supported or have energy behind them from each of these individual communities. In the past, we've done whole district thought exchanges for student assignment, and we'll revert to that when we get to the major drafts in September. But we thought it wise this time around to really focus on the individual new school sites so we could get some specific and unique information for each of these communities in respect to their new sites. So here then, I will not read this slide to you, but this will give you an idea of what types of comments and thoughts would fall into each of these themes. So if we start at the top left and look at communication, terms like clear updates, consistent updates, frequent information. It might be something along the lines of, we want opportunities to engage, we want opportunities to provide feedback, we want more opportunities to have information available to us. Anything in that sort of general category would have been categorized as a communication thought. If I go over to the right and maybe look at school operations in the second column, perhaps they were saying, we just want to know what the bell schedules are. One of our sessions was related to the Felton Grove High School, and it was shortly after you all had had a conversation related to potential start time changes for high schools and what that might look like. So a little bit of extra energy was around the idea of what's the bell schedule going to be for the new high school. So they wanted to make sure they got that out there, and that's great. That's important for us to hear. Some of our elementary schools said, hey, I've got great before and after school care options here. If I get reassigned, will I have those at my new site? I have YMCA here, will I have YMCA there? Or I have school offered here, will I have school offered there? Will there be before and after school care? Those kinds of questions. Top of mind for a lot of families were safety concerns. What's the safety plan for the new school sites? What's the safety plan for trailer units? Those sorts of things. So anything that really related to safety would be in the school operations section. And then there were a handful of comments related to class size, growth, crowding, those sorts of questions. So you can kind of read through this, and I'll pause for a moment to see if anybody has any questions about the general themes or the types of comments that might be in the theme.
Thank you. So this is probably a bigger discussion for a later time. Two things. One, where you broke up the themes, the feedback for the different themes for the different schools, like you had back on page 21. I was just curious, as the reassignment plan is being developed, if we would get an opportunity to see the feedback from each school, like how those themes are prioritized?
Yes.
And then the second thing...
They're already on the future school site.
Oh, okay. The second thing is that some of the work, one of the things that's so frustrating, like on from a policy level and doing this work, is when you get conflicting views. And, whether it's families or students or teachers or even administrators, they tell you one thing is important, and then they also say a second thing is important, which is in direct opposition, where you can't have both. Here, the way continuity is organized, I've heard the continuity argument for cohort continuity. We want to continue middle school to high school with the same students, and I've seen plans where we've tried to ensure that when a new school has been opening. But then we get the other argument from the same neighbors in the same neighborhood. We bought a house in this neighborhood. Our older kids went to this school. We want to stay at that school. And so, you could be making the argument, oh, this is good because we're moving them to a new school to keep them with other kids, to keep the cohort continuity. But really, what they want in some cases is just not to move, right? And how you tease those out, I just don't know.
Thank you for that segue. That's actually one of the areas that we're going to be exploring with our focus groups, because we want to get some clarity from parents. We can make a lot of assumptions about what cohort, continuity, feeder pattern means because of the way we use the terms internally, but that may or may not reflect what the parents really mean when they're using those same terms. So that is actually an area we're going to dive into with our focus groups next week.
And also recognizing that regardless of what your feelings are, when it comes to your family and your kids, change is really hard.
Yes.
Dr. Eng?
Yeah, it kind of goes along with Mr. Haley's. In terms of the school calendar options, I think that was something that we've encountered where there's a lot of assumptions, and how do you educate families who may have had a child on based on previous rules, and now they're assuming that the same rules apply now, and how do you communicate that to as many people as possible?
And for me, I think that resonates with our very first theme, was that please don't make us figure this out on our own. Please help us find this information as quickly as possible. So on our side, we just understand that we need to continue looking for all of the avenues to simply and quickly and effectively share with families any changes that might affect their family. and be really kind and gracious when they realize there's a change for their family and maybe they didn't get the information early on. It's hard, being as large as we are, to be accurately getting into every single home every single week, but we're working to continue to partner with our communications team and, as I mentioned, the equity office to really figure out what's the right way to get messaging out into the community. We're even exploring more face-to-face interactions in smaller group settings as needed, because we've not been able to do that over the last.
Ms. Waters?
Well, I'm glad that you said that piece about the small groups and because I do really worry, because there is such a spectrum of engagement for our parents, and there's also a spectrum of technology skills. So like with the thought exchange, I think it's a wonderful tool, but I just wonder how many of our families who are more vulnerable don't feel engaged in a process like that. So I appreciate that you are thinking about those small groups and those more hands-on opportunities to gauge feedback from our families, especially for those families who often don't find out about things until it's too late, and then they're kind of in sort of crisis mode when they find out, oh, my child's here and I didn't even realize it. So appreciate the intentionality to be sensitive to our families who rely on different parts of the technology and the engagement spectrum.
All right, so now I'm going to apologize. I know this looks horrible. But as a person working with the data, this slide reflects one of the reasons why we absolutely love the support that we get from this particular tool. Because one of the new features is, if I have similar exchanges across multiple settings, I can quickly compare them with each other. So I again, apologize for the busyness of this slide, but it shows you on a small scale what we can learn very, very quickly by categorizing the thoughts into the themes and then figuring out what the energy is. So what this shows us is that across all of the sessions and all the participants and all of the thought exchanges for this particular question, as a group, the theme that had the highest support and highest energy and highest, sort of star ratings would be the group called continuity. Yet if you look at continuity, you can see there's quite a bit of variation from session to session about how those particular session participants responded to those types of thoughts and ideas. So if you look at the far left bar, it's on my screen, it's purple or deep purple, represents the future Felton Grove High School responses. You can see lots of energy on that far left column across all topics. Yet you can see as we get over to the right in categories like school choice, quality education for all, communication, and crowding, some sessions didn't have a single topic or thought that fit into those categories. So that lets us look at them individually as well as a collective. So I'll just ask you on this slide to be mindful that continuity was first, proximity was second, and school operations was third. If we flip forward to the next slide, I reduced the stress a little bit by only looking at the elementary schools that participated, and notice there's now a little bit of a shift. That proximity comes first, then continuity, and yet still school operations comes third. So the power of this internally is that we can start looking at what the district-wide perspective is, yet I can also individually go and look and say, ooh, crowding has some energy for a couple of our schools where maybe it wasn't on top of mind for a couple of our other schools. Or school operations seems to pale a little bit in comparison to continuity and perhaps plans for growth depending on which school I was in. So we can look at this individually, school by school, to inform our decision-making process. We can also look at this as a district-wide look, or at least in this case, these schools that were participating. And then one more quick look at how we can compare the data here. I thought, well, the middle school and high school parents probably have similar types of concerns, thinking about what those impacts are when we start moving into that sort of secondary level. So comparing the Felton Grove High School responses and the Parkside Middle responses, you can see a little bit of alignment around topics such as transportation and continuity. Interesting, proximity drops to about third, but I think that's consistent with what we know about the locations of our middle and high schools, because they're so large that they're usually not always super close to home. And transportation here, while it might seem interesting to think, well, gosh, these students are getting a little older, what are the transportation concerns? As you read into the thoughts, particularly at the high school level, it's about the student drivers. And at the middle school, it might be before and after school pickup because we've got extracurricular activities or things along those lines. So it's just an interesting perspective to see how it changes from level to level, which is power in separating separating the topics. But really, the big question is, what does this mean for our planning process? So as was mentioned already, thank you, Mr. Hegarty, for bringing it up. We need more information on some of these topics. Some of them are still a little bit vague, and we don't want to make any assumptions sitting in a seat of a district personnel. We want to make sure we're really understanding what parents mean by these various comments and thoughts and ideas. So we have already partnered with the Data Research and Accountability Department to host some focus groups. We're going to kick those off next week. And we're going to not only ask for clarity on a couple of topics, but also bring up topics that surprisingly went unmentioned. You'll notice that calendar was not a major theme. Color me shocked, right? Especially with so many elementary schools and a middle school on the horizon. We did hear this idea of cohort continuity, and we heard this idea of what I have now I'd like to have later, but no one, maybe one or two family members specifically said, I'd love to have traditional, I'd love to have year round, but it really wasn't an overarching theme in the conversation. So we want to explore that with a little bit more depth because we know that's critical to the decision-making process for you as a board as we get closer to September and October and review those assignment areas. Second, if continuity and stability are key concerns, we want to be really mindful of that as we're reviewing our stability policy and stability rules. We also, as staff, have to admit we've got to think about operational concerns, and we have to think about our enrollment growth projections. So how do we match that with the parent concerns and align it with your policy? So we need to be thoughtful of that as we're bringing stability rules forward. And then the feeder patterns. Once we get a little bit more understanding about what families are talking about with continuity, let's look through that lens as we're bringing forward any recommendations that might have an impact on longstanding assignments or perhaps aligning those cohorts. So where are we? So this will be our closing slide for all of our presentations in this cycle, where I kind of gray out what we've accomplished as a board together. Where we are today will be sort of in that highlighted pink color, and then what is ahead for us in the future will be in the darker gray. So we already had our initial planning discussion on May 2nd. Today we're getting the update and providing that to you related to our public engagement activities. We are confident that by September 19th, we'll be able to bring forward the first draft of the plan. As a reminder, we'll focus on the opening of Woods Creek Elementary and all of the other items we discussed in May, as well as anything that comes out of the discussion from the public engagement. We'll continue to do more public engagement activities once the draft is released. We'll bring refinements to you in October. Our goal is to bring you the plan in November, and that's where I do want to pause. I know that the November schedule hasn't been set yet. It's our understanding that you might be considering going with the second and fourth Tuesdays. That way we kind of wrap around Thanksgiving. If that's where we head, our recommendation would be to try to be prepared to receive the final plan on the 28th. That would give you the 14th as either extending a public hearing as part of your regular session, or if you wanted to call a separate special session for the public hearing, you could do that. So we're still just need direction on that. That is an ask.
That will be coming.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, I remind everyone to go to Future Schools. That's where you're going to find all your information, and then of course we'll open it to any questions or comments that you might have, or guidance for staff that you might have.
Just a reminder, we're working hard to make up some time, so thank you, Ms. Pulliam, for going quickly and also hitting all of the information. So questions at this time or comments from board members? Ms. Edmonds?
I attended one of their sessions, and if I didn't mean this very sincerely, I would just keep my mouth shut. But I was so impressed with you and your team, and it was so inviting, like low key, low pressure. It felt very conversational with the families, and in that one, experience I had with it, I felt the families received it very well. Whether or not they were happy or whatever, I felt like it was a very healthy, productive time together, and I just want to commend you and your team for that. And to tell y'all you should go to one of their sessions.
So, Ms. Johnson-Hosmer?
Sure. One of the things I will say is, while we didn't, and I echo my colleagues' sentiments for the one that I attended, while calendar wasn't a huge issue, it goes back to me speaking to our image. There was an assumption that we had already decided all the calendars, so I want to note that sometimes that might be why we didn't hear it, because I can't speak for any but the one I went to, but parents kept saying, well, we already heard you decided the calendar. I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So again, when there is a community telephone game that people don't bring up things that they assume we've already, except for people who are really going to push the envelope, which I always appreciate, because if they don't ask, we don't know that they believe we've made some unanimous decision when it hasn't come to us. So I just think that's important to note that there may be other things that people have assumptions about. So as you talk to your families in your community, it's helpful, I think. And Susan and Glenn and their team was super amazing. And by far, I think I already said this to Glenn, it's all the things that I've asked for years. Like I will say it is the most diverse group of parents I've ever seen in a room, in my district specifically, who were there. I can tell you there hadn't been there because of diversity in the past. The direct contact made all the difference for those parents in that room, to know that it wasn't just, hey, please come. It was, you have a child in your home who will be impacted by this, that I believe made parents show up. So thank you for doing that. And I do think the focus groups will add another layer of opportunity, but I will say the direct communication, which parents don't often get unless it's the, what do we call it, the messenger that they get at home. I heard loudly from parents in my district that they felt appreciative to know that it was directly to them. So thank you.
So my question was, what are the next steps and when can these communities expect to hear from us again? And I would segment that off with Woods Creek coming in this year's anticipated enrollment plan, and then the other 6 communities that were engaged during this process.
So the plan over the summer will be to emphasize the opening of the new school. So we're working and partnering again with the communications department to create as close as I can, a virtual version that's live of what we were able to pull off face-to-face, so we can expand our outreach and perhaps get even more families to participate and have translation services available, much like we did as best we could in some of the other sessions. So that'll be going out to those specific communities once we get everything scheduled and buttoned up. I didn't want to put it on here because I don't have a date yet,
Right.
But we are working to get that pulled together. The other teams, we told them when we were in their sessions that we're going to probably do some asynchronous and virtual touches as we go along in the fall because of the emphasis on the annual enrollment plan, and then we'll definitely come back out again in the spring, and that'll be a sort of a cycle that we want to repeat on an annual basis for any schools that'll be opening.
Dr. Ng?
I'm actually looking at the Future Schools website. I really like it, especially the one on the enrollment caps and the history, outlined all the when each school was capped. I thought that was very nice. I think, going back to talking about the calendar options, and that having some of the history in the website may help people understand what has happened in the past, and and don't expect that today is the same as 5 years ago.
Ms. Hopkins?
Thank you for putting all that together. It was a lot of information to spit out here. So is this, I understand that you guys went to, I guess it's in your district. Is this happening in every district or just for the new schools that you mentioned?
For the face-to-face sessions, we focused only on the areas where a new school was open because of the nature of the types of feedback we needed to receive. However, once we shift into the whole planning process, we will be conducting outreach throughout the entire district.
Is that later on?
It'll be
Is that
closer
after
to the
November?
September time period, yes. One thing that we have shifted our focus on, I think someone mentioned, getting the email after the decision was made. We've definitely shifted our focus to make sure we're engaging families as early as we can. So when we get to the September timeframe and we're getting ready to bring a recommendation to you, at that moment, we will immediately start reaching out to families that have maybe not been plugged into that point to say, please be looking, because you potentially are impacted, and we'll continue to send those reminders throughout the entire process ad nauseum, to the point where could you please stop? But
So I guess for me.
and we work with the
specific-
principals as well to do other forms of outreach to families if we're having a hard time engaging them.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, is where would these families see it? Like for District 1, for the example, like where would we see that? Through the principal message?
Right. Yes, so it'll be a partnership between the way we do whole district communication and then the way each individual school does their communication. So it's the partnership between both of those angles. We try to hit them from as many sides as we can. So they'll see it the way they normally get their weekly messages from their
Right.
principal, or other types of messages from their school. And then your board advisory councils as well, we will always plug into those as needed to support either.
We'll end with a question from Ms. Fox.
So, in looking at the timeline and what is to come and what to expect, can you share any input on sort of our other desire to see some of our students move to more proximate schools, particularly in some of our neighborhoods who are traveling, as I hear, past 5, 6, 7, 8 schools to go to the schools that they're currently assigned to? Is that part of the work and part of the timeline? Can you speak
Yes,
to?
as what we addressed that in May, so I didn't know that to re-bring it up, but yes. So part of looking at our historical assignment areas, part of looking at operational efficiency issues, we certainly are mindful of that as we bring forward recommendations. So to clarify, we will most likely not just have an assignment area for Woods Creek. We will most likely have other suggestions as well and recommendations to address some of these common concerns, balancing it against all of the pillars in policy, yet trying to get some wins where we can. Yes.
And I think furthering that question, if I can, making sure that there's some sort of engagement session
Yes.
around those families
Yes,
that are
absolutely.
impacted, and the outreach that we saw that was positively received.
Similar formats
Yeah.
will be hosted, yes. Thank you.
Thank you all. We're now moving on to the next part of our work session, which is out of, with Mr. Nieder and Ms. Posey and Danny O'Quinn, talking about a review of our voluntary employee benefits contract. Hello and welcome.
Good afternoon again. And this time to chair my happy.
All right. Ms. Pulliam set a pace for everybody, so.
I will try to keep that going. I don't know that I can.
I'll give you credit for starting at the end.
Fair, fair.
That was third.
I don't know that I can keep this as brief as your earlier budget
Damn
update,
it.
but
I tried to give you his.
it'll be quick. 2 weeks ago, we presented to you the suite of all employee benefits provided by the district as an employer to our staff. The two largest benefits that we presented were the state health insurance plan and the state retirement system. We went through some examples of what those look like. We also shared with you the significant investment required by the district to invest in those respective benefits to provide them. And towards the end of your presentation 2 weeks ago, we shared with you the voluntary benefit plans that we offer that our employees can opt into on their own. And we shared with you 2 weeks ago that we had put that out to RFP. Today, what we'd like to do is review that RFP in more detail, share with you our recommendation that is on your agenda for tonight, and then be available to answer any questions. And what you see on this slide are things related to the RFP that we're going to go through. And I do want to point out, this type of contract is considered a service contract. We are not required to put this out to bid. We are not required to award this to a low-price provider, being a service contract. That being said, it still behooves us to periodically put contracts like this out to bid to ensure we are getting the best possible services and the best possible pricing. But one of the things that enters into with services is the value and the competency of the services that are surrounding whatever the contract is about.
Mr. Nieder, can you just speak up a little bit? I think
Yes.
the air turned on, so it's hard to hear.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
This slide here, and I'm not going to go through it, but this provides an introduction, and actually the backstory on this, the board a couple years ago, a year and a half ago, requested that we look at putting this section of our benefits, the voluntary benefits, out to bid. It had been many years since we had done it. And it was a good direction, so we have done that now. And if you jump down to the third paragraph, I think that really sums up at a high level what these plans are. And again, these are supplemental plans to the employer-provided benefits. The employees can elect to take advantage of them or elect not to. It's up to them. This next slide provides you a listing of our current plans. A couple of these on here are not voluntary, like the healthcare, but the majority of them in the pre-tax plans and the post-tax plans are the 13 different voluntary plans that we do offer. You also see the state pension plan, that's not voluntary. This is really a list of the entire benefit suite that we currently offer, not just the voluntary. Pardon me? And so now we want to do some definitions because I think that's important. We think that's important. And the distinction between a vendor and a broker. A vendor, and I'm going to oversimplify, might be a single provider of a type of insurance plan or policy, whereas a broker is more a representative of different insurance vendors who can assemble a suite of different products and then provide a single point of contact for provision of those things. And the benefit of working with a broker from a service perspective is the continuity of service. If we wanted to, for example, we could find 13 different types of voluntary insurance covered by different vendors, but then to engage with 13 different vendors directly. Our employees would have to work with them each individually, and we on the administrative end would have to do the same thing. And we don't think that is conducive to a high level of customer service to our employees, rather than find a best of breed, if you will. This slide shares with you just some language that is straight out of the RFP. And again, we're going to read this to you, but I do want to share a couple sentences from this. It is the intent of the Wake County Public School System to meet or exceed the current flexible benefits offered. Instead, we are ensuring that our employees are continually offered competitive benefit services and products available. And all benefit plans are enrolled annually or upon a qualifying life event through either a single enrollment site or via an on-site representative. Again, speaking to that more or less single point of contact or broker. So getting a little closer to the actual RFP. This slide is a listing of the 9 respondents to the RFP. Again, I'm not going to review this. The team that we assembled, and you saw this next slide a couple weeks ago, to vet these proposals and narrow it down to some finalists and then ultimately to a recommendation, included staff from Deborah Wallace, who's in the room with us. She's our head of purchasing, acting as senior director. She and her team, who actually oversaw the RFP process, and then subject matter experts coming largely from Danny O'Quinn's team, again, our senior director over compensation services and benefits, and then finally a steering committee to move this group together. This group, working through interviews with the finalists, series of rubrics, narrowed it down to 4 finalists. And then went through what is called a SWOT process. Some of you may be familiar with that, but it's evaluating strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of each of the 4 vendors. And again, I'm going to cover some of the highlights, but the 4 finalists were the Pierce Group, who happens to be our current provider as well. Pierce Insurance, working through a direct model. Pierce Insurance, working through NC Flex. And finally, another broker, and these are all brokers, an organization by the name of Mark III. So if you go across the top row, those are the strengths that the team evaluated. Under Pierce Group, demonstrated customer service satisfaction, marketing efforts, limited technical risk, considerable market presence, K-12 experience, sponsored full suite of current benefits, an already established employer relationship, 5 or less unique vendors, no-cost FSA administration, and competitive vision and medical bridging plans. One column over, the Pierce Insurance Organization under direct consolidated billing, considerable market presence, sponsored full suite of current benefits, again, no cost, flexible spending account administration, and again, 5 or less unique vendors. The next one over, the Pierce Insurance under NC Flex, consolidated billing, market presence, no cost FSA, and finally Mark III, K-12 experience, considerable market presence, competitive accident plan and long-term disability, and a sponsored full suite of current benefits. Then coming down to what were evaluated as weaknesses, and this is just a high-level summary. What was actually evaluated was much more detailed than this. Under the Pierce Group, our current provider or broker, weakness was multiple billing. Under the Pierce Insurance, and also under the direct and NC Flex, limited K-12 experience. And then under the NC Flex for Pierce Insurance, beyond that, did sponsor a full suite of the current benefits that we offer. And then under Mark III, multiple billings and more than 5 unique vendors. Opportunities under Pierce Group, possible new vendor relationships for accident insurance coverage. Under Pierce Insurance Direct, a new relationship, marketing efforts, customer service structure, and the building of employer-employee relationships. And then under NC Flex, again, a new relationship, marketing efforts, having to build a customer service structure and employer-employee relationships. And with Mark III, similar new relationship, marketing efforts, customer service structure, and building those relationships. And finally, under threats, under Pierce Group, competitive accident and long-term disability plans. Under Pierce Group Direct, transition to new vendors creates technical risks that are overcomable, but it's just, again, we're identifying them. Same thing under Pierce Group, or Pierce Insurance NC Flex. And then under Mark III, again, having to put in place new technology. And again, it's not a reason not to go down that path, but it's just part of this overall SWOT process to identify what would it look like if we went down any of these paths. So, based upon that analysis, the team narrowed that group of 4 down to 1. And here's a high-level summary of what our recommendation that we're bringing to you today will be. And again, these voluntary benefits work on a calendar year basis. Our employees will be able to opt in during open enrollment period, but they won't go into place until January of 2024, and then they run for a calendar year. And if there is a life-changing event like a marriage or a divorce or certain other things, people can opt in or opt out outside of the fall. But generally, it's in the fall, and it then goes into place. So our assessment says that our recommendation, a little over a third of our employees will save almost $25 a year in administrative costs on their flexible spending accounts. And while that's not huge, every dollar counts. The majority, 70% of our employees will enjoy increased benefits with a 15% reduced premium rate on their vision plan. A little over 10% will enjoy increased benefits with about a 6% 6% reduced premium rate on the medical bridge plan. There is no employee interruption for enrollment purposes. There are no increased technical risks or implementation workload. And the excellent customer care that we have had in the past from the recommended vendor, we have every reason to believe will continue. The benefits at the very bottom of this page, these are things, and you heard me speak about some of these a couple weeks ago. These are not part of the voluntary plan. These are things we just sort of kind of keeping on a placeholder, potential things to consider for the future. They're not part of the RFP. They're not part of our recommendation for tonight. So next steps. Award of a bid. It's on your board agenda for tonight for consideration of approval, and that recommendation is to award to the Pierce Group to act as the broker for these services of these various plans. Pierce Group will also now act as a broker for the MetLife insurance plan that we offer to our employees. There are no increased costs to Wake County Public Schools from an administration standpoint. As you saw, there are some reduced investments or costs to employees, or savings, I should say, to our employees that participate in the plans that were referenced. And tonight, we're just recommending award of the bid, and we will come back to the board at a later, soon date with the actual contract. We felt it would be premature to come back with a contract before you got to the other side of approving the award. And again, the new options become available January 1st. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Chairman Happy, for any questions.
I already see some hands up. Mr. Hershey.
On the employee impact, do you have a comparison of what the other four, I'm assuming the employee impact, slide 9, is if we keep Pierce Group, but what would have been, do we have a comparison on what savings potentially would have come from the other groups in this bit, the 3 other groups?
So for the vision, for the vision plan, where the 70% had that increased benefits and the reduced premiums, no other broker offered that.
Okay.
So it would be the same plan or lower percentages of savings.
Is that comparable with the administrative costs and the increased benefits for the medical bridge plan as well? I mean,
Medical bridge plan.
you just gave us, what I'm getting at is we got the SWOT analysis, but we didn't get a price or savings analysis comparison.
So when we chose the Pierce Group as a recommendation,
Yeah.
it's because those plans far exceeded the other ones.
Okay.
So if we did a comparison, they would be lower.
That's
in
what I was
savings.
getting at.
Yes.
Okay.
So all of those plans that are listed, including the FSA plans.
For same benefits?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, can
Yes,
I
go.
add to that?
Yes.
So lower in savings, but is it apples to apples?
Yes, yes. And it's very complex, and I've tried to summarize this for you. There's a lot of different tiers of benefits, right? A lot of different types of x-rays, cancer treatments. So we looked at the top tiers of all of that and compared apples to apples and premiums to premiums. And that's how we got to the Pierce Group benefits.
Just one more question. The only other question, and as we kind of go back to a previous presentation on culture and such, are we getting feedback from employees that this is what they want, these certain specific voluntary benefits? I don't know how the list is compiled, is what I'm kind of getting at.
That's a great question, Mr. Hershey. I do not believe we've done a formal survey, but one of the things, if you recall the presentation we made a couple weeks ago, we showed you, there was a slide in the deck that showed participation rates for all these different plans, including the state health plan, the retirement plan, way up there, and then on certain others. But one of the things is we continue to look at how can we improve our benefits. It will behoove us to reach out directly to the employees. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we've looked at what other districts are providing for their employees, their districts, as a part of this process as well.
And I'll just throw one more log on the fire, that I think that's also contemplated in the desired outcomes that you saw earlier
That's
today
what
from the
the-
HR recruitment piece,
Right.
in terms of what is it that our employees want, that either isn't there or more of, less of, et cetera.
Right.
Thank you.
Mr. Swanson?
In addition to those lines, just out of curiosity regarding the Mark III, I know you said you all have looked at neighboring counties. I know Durham County, Gifford County is using their services. Is there a reason why we just chose not to? I just want a little more.
I think, and Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, for the pricing reasons she just shared, our employees will have better value for what they're asked to pay for the same type of insurance. And based upon looking at the potential provision of levels of customer service, which we think are critical for our employees, as well as to our district, in order to effectively administer the plan, we believe that the Pierce Creek distinguished themselves in that regard as well.
Can you speak up that last part? It got lost in the
I'm sorry.
air changes.
Two things. Price, our employees will get for similar, if not the same products, better value for what they're asked to invest. And based upon our assessment, we believe that the Pierce Group is in the best position over perhaps the vendor, the broker you just referred to, Mr. Swanson, to provide a consistently high level of customer service, both to our employees, our end customer in this case, as well as the administration, which is charged with overseeing this on behalf of the employees.
And I think I would add as well, you'll see that it indicates there's 5 unique vendors. So Danny can speak to the technical side of it, but when you have that many more vendors involved, we don't have the staff and capacity to manage all of those unique relationships. And this is employee data, so everything has to follow secure methods, technical restrictions. We do everything through, protected files and transfers. So it just creates a lot more work on the administrative side internally. So Danny, do you?
Yeah, so the Pierce Group will be working with 5 different vendors. Mark III will be working with more than 5, but we have to establish software interfaces with all these vendors through the Pierce Group. And every time you add another one, it's just one more thing to manage and one more thing that can go wrong for an employee as well as for our administration. And there's a higher cost to it.
I just have one more follow-up, and then I can put myself in the next queue. How often do we bid these contracts out? After we approve this potentially, will we go out and say, let's say, 5 years from now or a year from now? I don't want to say 5, because I think we've had.
Well, let me back up. There's no requirement to even put this out to bid. Good practice would indicate every 3 to 5 years.
So moving forward, it'll be a practice at every 3 to 4 years.
Yes. And if something comes up that indicates there should be a higher frequency, something we don't even anticipate now, we can make that decision 1 year down the road, 2 years down the road.
I know I said one, but this will be my last follow-up. After we're going through and hearing from staff, let's say staff determines that there's other pieces that we're looking at, but they're not necessarily seeing or
Right.
There's a disconnect. Let's say next year we look at the data and it shows the staff wants something completely different. Would we then put out another bid to meet those needs?
We could. We could.
We could, but we generally.
We could. If there was something compelling to indicate the need to do so, we absolutely
Yeah,
would.
so I think the options you end up with are, is it something that the existing vendor can provide, right? Is it something that needs to be put out to bid because they won't provide it, or the cost is prohibitive, or it's not an area of expertise, whatever the reason might be. There would be different reasons that you could possibly do that, but I think it would behoove us to first explore the extent to which the existing vendor could provide or move forward, and I'll let Danny speak since she's got her hand over.
Sorry, I'm trying really hard.
Well, and I want to distinguish between these benefits and the other benefits we spoke more about. These benefits are benefits that employees are funding on their own behalf.
Yeah.
The others are not. So we believe focusing on customer service and allowing our employees to get the most insurance or whatever the coverage is for the best funding are the two primary drivers. And then a secondary driver is what is the cost to administratively manage it? And the cost is not always a fiscal cost, it can be a cost of error or omission, which turns into customer service levels going down.
Right. And the reason why I was raising is because, I mean, certain pieces we can, like the recruitment and retention of staff, I think benefits us a piece that we can use to retain and to recruit new staff. So I think just being open to that pieces and just,
Right.
putting the bids out, more frequently can help us ensure that we're still.
And I think, as I think about it through the lens of an employee and not through a formal survey, but anytime I'm out in a school or out and about in another department, I do my own informal surveys on different topics, including benefits. And there's a price tag for the district on this one. But some of the district provided benefits where the district covers the cost or part of the cost. When we do a formal survey, I think that's what we're going to hear is most important to our staff. But that will require additional funding. And depending on the benefit, for example, if it was a match on a 401k or a 403b, significant political funding even for a modest match.
Ms. Johnson-Hosmer and then Dr. Ing.
So, this is just a basic question. You noted that there were multiple, more than these four. And I guess the first thing I read was, well, how is it, Pierce Group is still 3 of the 4, so it's, yes, they're, and I get that they're different, but I'm like, it's still the same company. So
It is not.
So then why are they called Pierce?
They're separate entities.
Yes.
Here's the first one that is a legal entity. The next two
I
are
hear
the
you.
same entity.
I hear that. I'm
They may have
asking
the
you.
same name.
And they're not related at all?
No.
We actually have the Pierce. Slide 7 has a breakdown of all of the various providers and the history of each of them. So the Pierce Insurance is different from the Pierce Group.
Right.
And they are not.
They're not related.
So their last name is like Johnson is what we're saying?
Yes.
Because I saw the difference, but that is not a distinction. So it still wasn't a distinction that they weren't related, like State Farm could be Kathy Moore,
Danny is
Monica
very
Johnson
methodical,
Osler.
and she has a massive sort of legal size spreadsheet of all of the vendors. And so we have higher participation in certain programs. And so
Absolutely.
we are actually improving in those areas where we have higher participation from staff. They're going to get better benefits in this recommendation. So there was an evaluation that ranked every single one of these. They spent, I think, a whole week set aside where the subject matter experts went in and ranked each and every single one of the providers.
Yep.
They narrowed it down to the four plans that were being offered, and then did further evaluation.
Yeah, I got it. It was literally just, is this like Johnson? I saw all the notes here. It was, that was my technical question. And that is also why I asked, was it apples to apples? Because you did show us already the usage. I mean, again, as a spouse of an employee, most of these aren't cost effective for a teacher's salary. And I can't imagine for our other employees, they're just not. I mean, based on their pay alone. So that's why I asked if it was apples to apples, because while these are useful benefits, most of them are not, they're cost prohibitive to our employees because
Right.
they are paying,
And
it's their contribution.
Again, I'm going to go back a couple of slides. The clicker lets me. I have a battery problem.
While he's doing that, I'll also say, and this is anecdotal, which is why follow-up and getting specific information from employees would be helpful. But anecdotally, and I, I'm old, so maybe this is just not the old in me speaking as well, but we seem to be having more employees who would prefer salary over benefits.
Absolutely.
And
Inflation's killing us.
and so what they want is not that we pay for their dental insurance, but that we give them a raise. And I mean, those are anecdotal comments that I hear at a lot of places, and so I think that's a shift that we need to pay attention to also. But we won't know for sure until we actually check with our staffs.
Well, and I would also say, like, there's a both and to that, because I remember being a lower paid worker and wanting my salary because it's there in front of me. And so I would forego other things so I could have a higher salary.
And I do think it speaks more to the incredible need we have to address salaries in the state of North Carolina, and the legislative requirements there that are not being met in order to really have a pulse on what our folks want.
I mean, even if the, even if we're able to, on the other side of the budgeting process, get our staff to a $17 an hour minimum, they're still, even at that minimum, below a living wage
Absolutely.
in this area.
Yeah, and that's us, time has changed. But my other technical question was, and you don't have to, I heard loud and clear we didn't have to bid this, but we did because we requested it, so thank you. But it doesn't start till January 1, so is there a reason why we did it this soon, or you just did it now because we asked you?
Well, we actually would have liked to have done it sooner. And it does take time, I think Danny was about to say, because she sent me an email earlier today. We need to notify, it's going to take 6 months to ramp some of
That's
this
what I was
up,
asking.
and the open enrollment starts before January, so there's a lot of runway that has to be built.
That's what I was asking,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay. That was my last technical question.
Dr. Ng?
Oh, just wanted to let you know, Ing is like Johnson.
Is it?
Yes.
We're not related, no kidding.
Was that, I'm sure there was more, right?
No, there's
Okay.
more. No. But you mentioned the RFP is not something that's required. But certainly I can understand, having the established way of doing things is potentially more cost effective to continue, same system programs and things that you can continue implementing. But I also look at it like, like when you're looking at refinancing your house, it's always worth looking to see if it's more cost effective, but not necessarily jump into it, So I think that's kind of like what you were saying, right?
I think more or less, yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Swanson?
So, another technical question. How long have we been with the Pierce group?
Probably a long time, probably over 10 years. I will get you an answer to that if you would like.
No, well, just for this, I guess, because we've been with them so long, do we get a discount or something? What is the benefits for us having such a long relationship with an organization?
I would say some of the benefits, we've proven through the exercise of the RFP and the evaluation that for many of the high participation rate voluntary benefits, our employees are going to get better value through organizations that the Pierce Group as a broker represent than others. The other is consistency. Consistency of outreach, the Pierce Group, and I'm going to compare it to, for example, who we currently use for 403B plans. Significant outreach to our employees to work with them during the open enrollment period and establish relationships. And at the end of the day, do all these organizations offer similar services, all these brokers? Yes. And it's really incidentals. And they're all for profit. And we're trying to find out what's the best service we can provide to our employees and our administration and the best value for these benefits that our employees are paying for themselves.
So I just have some feedback. Did you have another follow-up? I'm sorry, before I begin.
I'll give David a break for a second.
I think just some feedback based on what I'm hearing around the table is that insurance is a difficult thing for anyone to wrap their head around. And I say that as someone who briefly worked at an insurance place and then asked their director, what insurance plan should I choose? And she said, oh, I don't understand it. And had worked in the industry for quite some time. And so, number one, thank you for bringing this together in that complexity. Danny, I don't envy your position at all. And thank you for being here. But I think for the next time that this comes around, whether we decide that's a 3 or a 4 or a 5-year cycle, I think making sure that we have a full understanding of what benefits we offer coming first, perhaps through a work session, perhaps through a future finance committee would help us there instead of having to do all of this at once. And then again, not bringing this the same night that we're voting on it so that we can ask follow-up questions for the future would be helpful. Are there any further questions on this before we move on? All right. So we are now moving on to, thank you all very much, to the community eligibility, provision. As we're getting started, Superintendent Moore, was there anything you wanted to say on this?
So I will just say that they're going to give you an overview of community eligibility provision. I'm trying to take care of some hanging chads as I'm walking out the door, and this is another one of them, right? Where there has been some conversation around the table from several board members about how we can take advantage of CEP more in some of our schools and how that works and what the impact is for students with regards to the entire school being eligible for no-cost meals, how it impacts our other structures like our Title I schools and the funds that they receive. How do we, and finding the and in the middle of all of those, right? So I think that, this is one where in speaking to both Chief Operations Mark Strickland and Chief Academic Advancement Officer Stacy Wilson Norman, which is Title I and CNS, my charge was find the and let's figure out how to go ahead and move forward. So hopefully that's what you'll hear.
Well, welcome back, Ms. DeLuca.
Thank you. So I am here obviously to talk a little bit about this topic that came before you some time ago, and the community eligibility provision. I will be giving you a very, very brief overview of how its structure works and then what happens during the process of our review of schools. So essentially, all of our schools traditionally have students that qualify for free or reduced meal benefits based on their completion of a free and reduced meal benefit application. We look at their income, we look at the family size, we establish their benefit based on federal regulations. Over a period of years, within the last, I'd say 15 to 20 years, they introduced what's called direct certification, and that's a process where we tag on electronically to a state portal that allows us to stream data through to our technology system, indicating students that are eligible for food stamps or TANF, which are then at that point considered directly certified because they've been certified by an outside organization. So two groups of people. We've got students that are directly certified, and we still have the families that fill out the paper application because they don't necessarily qualify for or have not applied for food stamps or TANF. When it comes to the community eligibility provision, which was launched in 7 states approximately 10 years ago, and has since expanded nationally, that program is based entirely on direct certified students. And the way it works is this. On an annual basis, on April 1st, which is the date per federal law, we gather the number of students that are directly certified in each of our schools. We compare that to the enrollment to determine the percentage of students that are directly certified. That percentage is considered the identified student percentage for the school under the community eligibility provision. And when we look at the community eligibility provision, primarily we're looking at those plus a categorical eligibility of students, which could be a special circumstance such as they're foster, migrant, runaway, or homeless. So after we gather our data on the 1st of April each year, we take a look at the ISP, again, identified student percentage. The federal law is that if you have achieved a 40% ISP, you qualify for the Community Eligibility Program. However, 40% does not necessarily guarantee us the highest free reimbursement rate for every meal that we serve. There is this magic number. The magic number is 62.5%. Effectively, that times what the feds have introduced as a multiplier to that of 1.6 allows you to achieve 100%. And that 100% is really important for us because that's the point in which all of the meals that we serve, breakfast and lunch, can be reimbursed at the highest percentage rate for free. When you're at that 40% tier up to 62.5%, what you do is you take that ISP times the 1.6 multiplier, and the resulting percentage is the number of meals that you serve daily for breakfast or lunch that you can claim at that highest free reimbursement rate. All the rest get claimed at the lowest rate, the paid rate, which is somewhere around, I'm just going to say it hovers around 35 cents per meal compared to well over $4 per meal for the free reimbursement. And so in considering the community eligibility provision here in Wake County, I've watched it for upwards of almost 9 years now. Last year we added 7 schools. It actually was the first year 2 years ago, but last year we got all free meals for everybody, so I didn't have to introduce it. But this year we were fortunate to be able to do that, and these are the schools, Bog Connections, Longview, Mount Vernon, River Oaks Middle, Southeast Raleigh Elementary, and Walnut Creek that are on the community eligibility provision. We have 2 groups. So what happens with the community eligibility provision is this. If you have a very high percentage of directly certified students that goes beyond that 62.5%, you are able, by virtue of that 1.6 multiplier, to exceed 100%. You can leverage that higher percent and actually bring in some other schools that might not have reached that 62.5% and create what they call a group. And you balance out that group to try to achieve your 100% reimbursement. If we did not reach that 100% reimbursement, CNS would effectively receive that free reimbursement for the percentage of meals that we can claim based on the ISP times that 1.6 multiplier. But the LEA, meaning the school system, would have to help CNS with the costs for all of the meals that we are not able to claim at that higher rate. So we are really focused on the 100% so that it doesn't create an encumbrance of any kind for the school system. So at this point, we've completed our April 1st review. We've had additional schools that have reached that magic number of 62.5%. We have worked with the Title I department to evaluate what the next step implication could be, because under community eligibility provision, one of the caveats is that you can no longer ask families to complete a free or reduced price meal application. Community eligibility provision allows you to establish a base year, your first year, but it also guarantees you 3 additional years of being able to provide free meals to all the students in those schools without having to go through a recertification process. When moving into the direction of CEP, that could have some type of implication for Title I. And that's why it's important for Title I to become involved in the process, because their in-district allocations of Title I funding could be impacted. So in consideration of this year's results, we are recommending an additional 5 schools for next year, which would bring us to a total of 12. And that concludes what I have planned to present, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, I see Mr. Haggerty and Mr. Hershey.
Thank you, Ms. Lip. I really appreciate the presentation. And one thing that you brought up and you emphasized there, created a question in my mind. So I did not know if you qualified for the community eligibility program, that the families could not be asked to complete the benefits application, the meal benefit application. And so I just want to make sure I understand this. It seems, or I thought that there were other programs or funding for schools that was tied to our numbers, tied to data collected from the meal eligibility program. You mentioned Title I potentially. And so by not completing the survey at some schools, especially if we know that their needs or we suspect their needs, do we potentially forfeit other benefits or funding those schools could receive?
So the federal guidance for Title I, as well as the community eligibility provision, does have an allowance for an alternative education benefits form to be completed. And by virtue of that, we would effectively take our free and reduced application form, strike all references to meals, introduce education benefits, and those families could complete that, and then therefore that data point could be provided. At this point, we haven't really talked about that, but that's an opportunity that could be pursued.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
I think that's also why you see on these slides, phase one, right? We know that there's more work to be done, but it's not something that we can really take on all at once. So we need to really understand the impact and how it plays out in our schools, and both with the reimbursements, the Title I piece, and carve an intentional path moving forward.
So just a quick follow-up. In a lot of our community resiliency, a lot of our community health work, like Wake County government, our municipalities, we're really looking at a lot of different social and economic indicators to look at, program delivery. Is it effective? Is it fair? Is it equitable? And some of the data they really try to use are to look at things like meal participation or free and reduced lunch numbers. And I'm encountering more and more organizations looking to that data. And so I just wanted to make sure that if participation in this program doesn't throw off those numbers or create blind spots, where there could be communities that could qualify for other assistance, economic assistance, but aren't, maybe because we're not capturing the need.
Yeah, that's possible. And I'm going to say there are many ways to count need. And to rely on the one that we've been relying on for 40 years doesn't mean that it's the best one if it means that you don't apply for CEP schools. Yeah. Right? So
There might be an
that's
educational
that's what I'm trying to figure out,
process.
how to figure out the and. That's why the and is so important.
Thank you.
Mr. Hershey?
Well, I just have to applaud our superintendent, because I wrote down phase one implies a phase two, so thank you for covering that. Is this become an annual review?
Yes, actually, I will look at this every April 1st. I monitor it throughout the year just to see if I've got any trends forming, and then try to inform Title I to take a look at the numbers as well.
And what does this do for our budget or potential savings, or as a school gets onto a list?
I can tell you that the community eligibility provision very much replicates what we experienced last year with all free meals, and it was a tremendous help to child nutrition.
Okay.
But incrementally, 5 schools aren't going to really have much of a magnified result for us.
Okay. Thank you.
So my question, and thank you for this, is all, I believe, of these phase one schools are currently covered through local dollars for universal breakfast. So I know the question that we will be asked is, how are we going to reallocate those dollars and to what schools in order to maintain, expand the universal breakfast program?
Good point, and I look at that as well. Actually, 2 of these schools in expansion are on universal breakfast funded by Wake Gov.
Right.
Child nutrition funds
Okay.
the other 3, so actually it will be a slight reprieve for us
Okay.
in terms of having to pick up the cost to pay for the meals that students don't pay for themselves. The approximated value for those two schools from weight gum funding is about $20,000. I would project that it's possible we may be able to look at adding one school, but it just depends because we have so very many schools right now on universal breakfast that when I start adding another one, I take the ones that are the highest and free and reduced, and so we've already covered that here, and we're getting a little bit, more with more paying students, and that's where the funding effectively goes to offset the cost of the co-pays of students that we don't collect money.
I just know that that question will be asked of us, so I figured I would ask it here. And
thank you.
So that I know the answer. All
Fully
right. Are there
prepared
any
for that.
further questions for Ms. DeLuca at this time? All right. We are going to move on to, thank you very much, to the Fostering Diverse Schools Demonstration Grant Opportunity. And we have Dr. Robinson, Ms. DeFleur, and Dr. Lane. Whenever you are ready.
Chairman Haffey, Vice Chair Hagley, Superintendent Moore, and esteemed board members. During our June 6th board meeting, the Fostering Diverse Schools Demonstration Grant Opportunity was approved by the board. Today, we are reaching out to seek your support to pursuing this grant opportunity. Mr. Four and Dr. Lang will provide an in-depth explanation of the grant, highlighting the key components and the potential impacts as well. At the end of the presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions, and then if you are in favor of us moving forward pursuing this grant, I wanted to make sure everybody was understood that there is a timeline involved, which we would have to submit the application by June 30th. So at this time, I turn it over to Mr. Moore.
Thank you. So the Fostering Diverse Schools Grant Program, the purpose of it is to provide students with access to a well-rounded education and to improve school conditions for student learning by developing or implementing comprehensive plans for increasing school socioeconomic diversity in preschool through grade 12. The grant opportunity has two absolute priorities, and districts can choose which priority they choose to apply under. It's one or the other. The first absolute priority is to develop a plan, and the second absolute priority is to implement a plan. We have been reviewing the guidelines for this RFP and considering the opportunity, and we are interested in applying under absolute priority 2, implementing a school diversity plan. This is up to 5-year grant under priority 2. The range for the awards would be $1 million to $4 million per year for the 5 years, and they anticipate making 1 to 3 awards, so it'll be somewhat competitive. It's a national grant. Under absolute priority 2, there are requirements that you must meet. We have to provide evidence that the plan is based on a comprehensive assessment of our community that we serve. We have to demonstrate that it's based on rigorous input from our families, students, communities, educators, and it has to have top-level leadership as support. And we have to document our commitment to ambitious, achievable goals for achieving socioeconomic diversity in our schools. In addition, because it is a demonstration grant, it requires transparent, published data analysis of the progress related to the goals of the grant. So they require that, if we were to receive the grant, if we were to engage in it, we would have metrics on our website. People would be able to look to us to see how we are making our progress. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lane now so she can describe kind of our thinking about content of the grant.
And I'm going to go forward to the end of your slides just to kind of set the context that this is part of Raising the Bar, Leading the World initiative. So we are really looking at supporting all students with high levels of schooling, accelerating learning for every student, delivering a comprehensive and rigorous education for every student, which I think is what our strategic plan certainly envelops. So in looking at this, what we have come up with through research is really looking at how the district might move from our desegregation efforts into integration, and we look to RIDES, which is no longer in existence but was part of Harvard. I think we also know there's a lot of articles that have been research written about Wake County Public Schools over the years in terms of how we do student assignment. We certainly are familiar with the new strategic plan, our new equity policy. So in looking for the requirements of the grant, we certainly felt like we met, as Mr. Ford said, the requirement for a comprehensive plan. But it comes in parts. So we're looking at the new strategic plan, certainly our new equity policy with the equity framework that the Equity Office is working on now building. Our policy 4100, which is drawing of student assignment areas, and the priorities that we look at, which would include the student achievement, the proximity, stability, those goals that are in the student assignment plan. And also at the RMP, the Regulation 4150, which talks about the access our community has to school choice or our application schools, and the socioeconomic priority that is already present. In talking with experts nationally, they have cautioned us that this has to be a plan that's already in existence, and you are building it out to better support the work that you're already doing. So we came up with a theory of change based upon research and our district practices and policies that looks similar to this. We would like to develop, use the money, as Cindy said, up to about $4 million per year for 5 years to develop a district-wide data dashboard. And that data we have now, but putting it all in one place that's easily accessible, not just for our internal employees, but also our external community, so community partners and our families. Gathering that data would look a little different in that we want to disaggregate that data by school and by classroom. This grant is intended to impact the district, the classroom, the school, the classroom level. And as our equity policy notes, the individuals that are in that building, so from a staff and student and family perspective. So really putting that data together and letting it inform the work. So that data would then provide an opportunity for a lens into where disparities might exist or the work that we need to do in a particular school. And what we know happens in our district is some schools do this work extremely well, but having a structure or a mechanism for sharing across classrooms, but also across schools. So if one school is doing a really great job of identifying advanced learners, then what strategies are they using so that we might be able to put that into additional schools? That's the capacity building, would require some professional development, not just about how you read the data, but really what can the data tell us? How do we dig into that data more narrowly so that we're using that to guide our work? As well as then when we identify particular areas. I used advanced learning earlier, so if we find a particular school that's not doing as well a good a job as another school in terms of identifying advanced learners, what professional learning might we work together with our equity office, the Office of Professional Learning, to build that capacity in our leaders and our teachers in the classroom. And then implementing equity efforts, and in talking, again, just kind of brainstorming through this, we really think this has to do with our equity actions that the board has approved. So equity would be woven through the data. It's really looking at the data through an equity lens. It's building capacity to support the work that you've already approved. It would just give us a mechanism of doing that and provide some additional support to the district in terms of personnel as well as the funding to be able to drive out the plan. In terms of the schools that we're looking at, we feel like this would impact 198 schools. So every student in every school, every teacher in every classroom, every school leader, district office staff. But as we think about rolling out something like this, we would probably roll it out sequentially. So deciding which schools might come first in the group that we're not really piloting, but implementing year 1 to year 2. We might look at our designated low-performing schools, our Restart, our Title I schools, really paying attention to that economic health index and the priority, maybe setting some priority there, as well as our academic performance. What the data dashboard would do is give us an opportunity to categorically look at the data in a way that we might not have been doing, but also then using that data to inform the professional learning through an equity lens. This is links that you have to the grant brochure and to the program website. I've already shared with you that it is part of the Department of Education's Raise the Bar, Lead the World initiative. We feel like it's a great opportunity to impact all students in all of our schools, and we are open for your questions.
And if I could, I just want to say that I really, when this first crossed my desk, I sent it to a group of folks to take a look at, because I really feel like there's an intersection here around what the equity policy that the board has adopted compels us to do, what our strategic plan envisions for us to do in the future, and some work that is being subsidized by the federal government that ties in with all of that, with an opportunity for funding for the district to do that work. And so while it was part of the approved slate of grant opportunities that the board saw at the last meeting, the amount of this and the alignment with other work that's going on in the district I felt was important enough to bring to the board for awareness prior to us submitting a grant proposal in the next couple of weeks, because it is in the next couple of weeks. So.
Thank you. Questions at this time, board members?
Just one.
Yep. And then Dr. Ing.
Oh, sorry. What you've put together, is it based on getting the maximum amount or any amount? Because I saw it's 1 to 4 million is a wide range annually. You can say 4 in case they're listening.
We like to be reasonable,
Yeah.
but work to achieve our goals. So something like this would be very expensive.
Okay.
And we're trying to build it up front, so build the sustainability. So we would probably be close to the max.
Feel good about 10 days?
We feel really good about 10 days.
Awesome. Love it.
All right,
Good
Dr.
luck.
Ing.
What's the time frame for the decision making for this to reach a
Decisions about this grant, the applications will be made so that the grants could begin October 1st.
We are usually, if it follows the same as the Magnet Schools Assistance Program grant, sometime late in the summer, we'll be waiting to hear from OCR, because the OCR will want to contact us to make sure that our implementation of this grant and our current system priorities align with regards to the expectations that the Office of Civil Rights has. And then those are attorney meetings. We all sit down together and answer questions about services and all of that. And then getting the OCR call is a hint that you might be being looked at for the actual grant. And then after that, we usually will hear sometime in September.
September.
It's usually, sometimes it's late September for implementation that technically begins in October. Well, the funding is received in October. So.
Further questions? Ms. Edmonds.
So in the brochure, on the fourth page, it's titled Comprehensive Plan Explained. Up in the definition area, it talks about actually increasing socioeconomic diversity within schools, classrooms, and educational programs. I know that our past practice was of diversifying our schools. We had the magnet program, but then we also had assignments that were on the burden of Black and brown children that didn't opt in to diversify the system. And I know that that's problematic, and we haven't had that conversation as this board, but I want to make sure I'm understanding that not I'll just say, it, not busing black and brown children as a part of this plan, but that it is clearly stated that they do mean actually increasing socioeconomic diversity within schools. That somehow assignment is going to be related to that?
Well, I think that, we're in a place now where we're really, how we foster choice is what's important for us in a district. And I have said before that the historical practices that led us to policy 6,000 40 years ago or 20 years ago, whenever that was in place, really are not doable as we move forward now. And we have the least amount of busing that we've ever had for that purpose. So I think what this grant allows us to do is explore opportunities outside of that can help support the intent of diversifying schools without relying on historical practices that don't work anymore.
Right. I just wanted to, because that's important to me, because I firmly believe, yes, we need to focus on academic achievement for all students, but there is so much great benefit that is not a test score or an achievement score, that all children benefit from being in community together. When we don't look like each other, we don't have the same experiences as each other, those differences have such great value. And I just want to make sure that that's part of our understanding as we seek this grant.
I think we certainly, and thank you for that, Ms. Edmonds. I think we certainly look forward to seeing what happens with this. I think it's an exciting opportunity. We know that there is a lot of hard work and I think a little bit of magic that comes out of your office, Ms. DeBoer and Dr. Lane. And so we're looking forward to seeing what happens, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. I'm being told that we have a number of speakers that exceeds last meeting. And so with that, if there are no more questions, I'd entertain a motion to go into closed session.
So moved. Second.
To consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.11A1 and A3, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11A3. We had is that a motion from Mr. Hershey and a second from
Either
Mr.
way.
Swanson?
Either way it
All right.
works.
All those in favor, please signify with a sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right. We are now in closed session. We'll wait for confirmation that the camera has closed down.